The morning mist hung heavy over the Sandringham estate as King Charles III walked slowly through the royal stables, his footsteps echoing against the polished wooden floors. Each stall held not just a thoroughbred racehorse, but decades of memories, victories, and a passion that had defined his beloved mother's life for over 7 decades. Queen Elizabeth II racing colors, purple and gold silks that had thundered past finishing posts at Ascot, Epsom, and countless other tracks, now hung silent in the tack room. For 96 years, the Queen had lived and breathed horse racing. She had bred champions, celebrated victories, and mourned defeats with the same intensity she brought to matters of state. Her horses were not mere investments or hobbies. They were living symbols of a tradition stretching back through centuries of royal history. Now, as the new monarch faced the reality of modern royal finances and changing times, an unthinkable decision loomed before him. The racing world held its breath as whispers began to circulate through the tight-knit community of owners, trainers, and bloodstock agents. Could the new king really be considering selling the crown jewels of British racing? Would horses that carried the hopes and dreams of a nation, animals that had given the Queen some of her greatest joys in life, really be put up for auction to the highest bidder? This is the untold story of a king torn between honoring his mother's greatest passion and the practical demands of a modern monarchy. It's a tale that would shake the foundations of British racing, divide public opinion, and force a nation to confront what truly matters when tradition meets reality. The decision that Charles would make in the coming months would not just determine the fate of some of the world's finest racehorses. It would define how a new reign would balance sentiment with practicality, and whether the roar of the crowd at Royal Ascot would ever sound the same again. The September morning at Balmoral felt different. King Charles III stood in the study that had been his mother's sanctuary for so many summers, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of a lifetime devoted to horse racing. Racing calendars from decades past lined the walls, their pages marked with careful annotations in the Queen's distinctive handwriting. Photographs of victorious moments captured forever showed a young Elizabeth beaming beside winning horses, her joy unmistakable and pure. The weight of inheritance pressed heavily on Charles's shoulders, but it wasn't the crown that troubled him most that morning. It was the 43 thoroughbred racehorses now under his ownership, each one representing not just significant financial value, but irreplaceable emotional connections to his mother's deepest passion. These animals have been the Queen's constant companions through triumph and tragedy, through the changing seasons of her remarkable reign. Queen Elizabeth II's love affair with horse racing had begun in childhood, nurtured by her father King George VI, who himself had been an enthusiastic owner and breeder. By the time she was 8 years old, young Princess Elizabeth was already studying bloodlines and asking probing questions about breeding that impressed even the most experienced horsemen. Her first racehorse, a filly named Astrakhan, had been given to her as a wedding present in 1947, marking the beginning of what would become one of the most successful royal racing operations in British history. The Queen's approach to racing had always been hands-on and deeply informed. She didn't simply lend her name to a stable and wait for results. Instead, she immersed herself completely in every aspect of the sport, from studying pedigrees late into the night to walking through the paddocks at dawn, checking on her horses personally. Her racing manager, John Warren, often spoke of her encyclopedic knowledge of bloodlines, her ability to recall the lineage of horses going back generations, and her intuitive understanding of what made a champion. The royal racing operation centered around the Sandringham stud in Norfolk, established by King Edward VII in 1886. Over the decades, it had become one of Britain's premier breeding establishments, producing horses that competed not just in Britain, but around the world. The Queen had personally overseen the development of the stud, working with a succession of brilliant trainers and bloodstock experts to create a program that consistently produced winners. Her racing colors, the famous purple and gold silks, have been carried to victory in over 1,800 races during her lifetime. The sight of those colors coming down the stretch at major racecourses had become synonymous with excellence in British racing. When Estimate won the Gold Cup at Royal Ascot in 2013, it marked not just another victory, but a pinnacle moment that combined the Queen's love of racing with her role as sovereign, as she became the first reigning monarch to win the sport's most prestigious prize. But the Queen's involvement went far beyond mere ownership. She was a student of the sport, spending hours each morning reading the Racing Post, discussing training regimes with her trainers, and making breeding decisions that would influence bloodlines for generations. Her annual pilgrimage to the Kentucky Derby, her visits to stud farms around the world, and her deep friendships with fellow racing enthusiasts all spoke to a passion that transcended royal duty. The financial aspects of the racing operation, while significant, had never been the primary consideration. The Queen had always viewed her horses as a long-term investment in British breeding, a way to support the racing industry, and a source of pure personal joy that connected her to the rhythms of life beyond the palace walls. The stud employed dozens of people in Norfolk, supported local businesses, and contributed significantly to the British racing economy. Now, as Charles contemplated the future, he faced a complex web of considerations that his mother had never had to address. The modern monarchy operated under different financial pressures, with greater scrutiny of royal spending and a growing expectation that the royal family would demonstrate fiscal responsibility. The maintenance costs of the racing operation, while modest compared to other royal expenses, represented millions of pounds annually in training fees, veterinary bills, staff salaries, and facility upkeep. The racing world watched nervously as rumors began to circulate about potential changes to the royal racing operation. Bloodstock agents, always attuned to shifts in the market, began making discreet inquiries about the availability of royal horses. The international racing community, which had always held the Queen's operation in the highest regard, wondered whether the new monarch would maintain the same level of commitment to the sport. Charles himself had never shared his mother's passion for racing to the same degree. While he appreciated the sport and understood its significance to his mother, his own interests lay more in environmental conservation, sustainable farming, and architectural preservation. The hundreds of hours his mother had spent studying form guides and bloodline charts were hours he preferred to spend working on organic farming initiatives or meeting with climate change experts. The personal dimension of the decision weighed most heavily on the king. Each horse represented memories of conversations with his mother, of watching her eyes light up when discussing a promising young prospect, of seeing her genuine excitement when one of her horses won a significant race. To sell these animals would feel like disposing of living pieces of her legacy, tangible connections to the woman who had shaped not just his life, but the life of the nation. Yet practicality demanded consideration. The royal finances, while substantial, were not unlimited. Every pound spent maintaining the racing operation was a pound that couldn't be used for other royal duties or charitable causes that might have broader public benefit. The king's advisors had prepared detailed financial analyses showing the costs and benefits of various options, from maintaining the full operation to scaling it back significantly or disposing of it entirely. The emotional complexity of the situation was compounded by the reactions of those closest to the Queen's racing operation. John Warren, who had served as a racing manager for over a decade, had built a deeply personal relationship with the Queen around their shared passion. The trainers, jockeys, and stable staff who had worked with the royal horses for years faced an uncertain future. The broader racing community, which had always taken pride in royal participation, worried about the symbolic impact of a withdrawal. As autumn deepened and the racing season wound down, the pressure for a decision intensified. The breeding season would begin again in the new year, requiring commitments and investments that needed to be made soon. The horses themselves, magnificent animals in their prime, represented peak value that would only decrease with time. The practical demands of decision-making pressed against the emotional weight of legacy, creating a tension that would soon demand resolution. The stage was set for one of the most difficult decisions of Charles's early reign, a choice that would reveal much about how the new monarchy would balance tradition with modernity, sentiment with practicality, and personal feelings with public responsibility. The racing world held its breath, knowing that whatever decision emerged would reshape one of British racing's most storied chapters and potentially mark the end of an era that had defined the sport for over 7 decades. The first formal meeting about the future of the Royal Racing operation took place on a gray October morning in the Oak Room at Windsor Castle. King Charles sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by his private secretary, the keeper of the Privy Purse, and John Warren, the Queen's longtime racing manager who now found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending a legacy he had helped build over more than a decade. Warren had prepared meticulously for this meeting, knowing that the future of everything he and the Queen had worked to achieve hung in the balance. His presentation began with the numbers that told the story of 7 decades of royal racing success. The Queen's horses had won over 1,800 races, earning more than £4 million in prize money. The breeding program had produced multiple Group 1 winners, horses that had gone on to successful stallion careers, and bloodlines that continued to influence racing around the world. But Warren knew that raw statistics alone wouldn't carry the argument. He spoke passionately about the Queen's unique approach to breeding, how she had combined intuition with scientific knowledge to create a program that was respected throughout the international racing community. He described her morning phone calls about training schedules, her detailed questions about each horse's development, and her genuine excitement when discussing the potential of young horses in training. The financial presentation painted a more complex picture. While the racing operation generated significant revenue through prize money, breeding fees, and horse sales, it also required substantial ongoing investment. The Sandringham stud employed 47 full-time staff members, from stud grooms to veterinary specialists. The annual training fees for horses in training exceeded £800,000. Veterinary bills, transportation costs, insurance, and facility maintenance added hundreds of thousands more to the yearly expenses. The keeper of the Privy Purse, Sir Michael Stevens, presented the broader financial context facing the royal household. Public scrutiny of royal spending had intensified in recent years, with particular attention paid to the costs of maintaining royal properties and supporting royal activities. The racing operation, while generating revenue, represented a net cost to the royal finances at a time when every expense faced increased examination. Charles listened carefully to both presentations, asking detailed questions that revealed his deep understanding of the complexities involved. He inquired about the potential impact on employment in Norfolk if the racing operation were scaled back or eliminated. He asked about the broader implications for British racing if the royal family withdrew from active participation. Most poignantly, he questioned whether there might be ways to honor his mother's legacy while acknowledging the financial realities of modern monarchy. The discussion moved beyond pure finances to consider the symbolic importance of royal participation in racing. For many British racing fans, the sight of the Queen's colors on race days had represented continuity and tradition in a rapidly changing world. Royal Ascot, in particular, had been defined by the Queen's presence and her genuine engagement with the racing. The annual processional arrival by horse-drawn carriage, followed by the Queen's careful study of each race through her binoculars, had become iconic images that promoted British racing worldwide. Warren argued that the Queen's racing operation had always been about more than personal enjoyment or even financial return. It represented the royal family's commitment to British agriculture, to rural employment, and to maintaining traditional skills and crafts. The Sandringham stud supported blacksmiths, saddlers, veterinarians, and dozens of other specialists whose expertise was part of Britain's cultural heritage. To abandon this suddenly would send a signal about royal priorities that might have implications far beyond racing. The international dimension added another layer of complexity. The Queen's racing interests had created diplomatic connections around the world, from her friendship with the Maktoum family of Dubai to her relationships with leading American breeders. These connections had often facilitated broader diplomatic and commercial relationships that benefited Britain in ways that were difficult to quantify, but nonetheless valuable. Charles found himself pulled between competing considerations. His environmental consciousness made him acutely aware that large-scale horse breeding and training carried a significant carbon footprint. The transportation of horses to race meetings around the world, the maintenance of extensive facilities, and the resource-intensive nature of thoroughbred breeding all conflicted with his well-established commitment to environmental sustainability. Yet he also understood the broader implications of royal withdrawal from racing. The sport had been struggling with declining attendance and public interest in recent years. The loss of royal participation might accelerate these trends, potentially damaging an industry that employed thousands of people and contributed significantly to rural economies across Britain and Ireland. The emotional dimension of the decision became clear when Warren shared specific memories of the Queen's involvement with individual horses. He described her reaction when Estimate won the Gold Cup at Royal Ascot, how she had been so excited that she briefly forgot royal protocol and spontaneously applauded in the royal box. He recalled her deep sadness when promising young horses suffered career-ending injuries, and how she had personally visited them during their recovery and retirement. As the meeting progressed, it became apparent that this was not simply a business decision that could be resolved through financial analysis. The Queen's racing operation was deeply intertwined with her identity as a person, not just as a monarch. For those who had worked closely with her, the horses represented some of their most treasured memories of a remarkable woman who found genuine joy in their success. The pressure for a decision intensified when news of the deliberations leaked to the racing press. The Racing Post ran a front-page story speculating about the future of the royal horses, triggering intense discussion throughout the racing community. Bloodstock agents began positioning themselves for potential purchasing opportunities, while racing fans expressed dismay at the possibility of losing royal participation in the sport. Public opinion proved divided when major newspapers picked up the story. Some readers expressed sympathy for the king's difficult position and supported any decision that would reduce royal expenses. Others saw the potential sale as an abandonment of British tradition and argued that the royal racing operation represented exactly the kind of cultural institution that the monarchy should support. The horses themselves continued their training routines, oblivious to the discussions determining their futures. At Newmarket, trainer Sir Michael Stout supervised the morning gallops of several royal horses, maintaining the meticulous standards that had characterized the Queen's operation for decades. The sight of horses wearing the royal purple and gold exercise sheets served as a daily reminder of the legacy that hung in the balance. International interest in the potential sale grew as word spread through the global racing community. American buyers, always eager to acquire horses with royal provenance, began making discreet inquiries about availability and pricing. Japanese and Hong Kong investors, who had become major forces in international bloodstock sales, also expressed interest in acquiring horses from such a prestigious source. The complexity of any potential sale became apparent as legal advisors examined the various options. Some horses were owned outright by the Crown, while others were held in partnership with other breeders. Young horses still in training represented different considerations from proven broodmares whose breeding careers could continue for many years. The timing of any sale would significantly impact values, with yearling sale season, breeding season, and racing season all presenting different optimal windows. As November arrived and the flat racing season concluded, the pressure for resolution reached its peak. Breeding decisions for the following year needed to be made, training arrangements had to be confirmed, and the staff at Sandringham required certainty about their future employment. The racing world continued to speculate, but those closest to the situation knew that a decision could not be delayed much longer. The stage was set for what would become one of the most scrutinized and emotionally charged decisions of Charles's early reign. A choice that would test his ability to balance respect for his mother's memory with the practical demands of modern royal leadership. The outcome would resonate far beyond the boundaries of British racing, serving as an early indicator of how the new monarch would approach the delicate balance between tradition and change that would define his kingship. The news broke on a crisp November morning that would forever change the landscape of British racing. The Times carried the headline in bold letters across its front page: King Charles considers sale of Queen's racehorses. Sir Michael Stout, who had trained horses for the Queen for over 30 years, received the news while supervising morning training at his Freemason Lodge stables. The veteran trainer, known for his reserved demeanor and professional approach, found himself unusually emotional as he considered the implications. For 3 decades, he had received regular phone calls from the Queen discussing training schedules, race plans, and the development of young horses. These conversations had been among the highlights of his distinguished career. The reaction from other trainers reflected both personal attachment and professional concern. William Haggis, another trainer with horses in the Royal String, had built a relationship with the Queen based on their shared passion for breeding and racing excellence. He spoke openly about his concern that the loss of royal participation would diminish the sport's prestige and potentially accelerate the decline in public interest that racing had been experiencing in recent years. The jockeys who had ridden the Queen's horses faced their own sense of loss. Ryan Moore, who had partnered several royal winners in recent years, described the unique pressure and privilege of riding for the Queen. The knowledge that the monarch was watching, often through binoculars from the royal box, added a dimension to racing that existed nowhere else in sport. The possibility that future generations of jockeys might never experience that particular thrill represented a loss that went beyond mere career opportunities. International reaction revealed the global impact of the Queen's racing operation. In Ireland, where the Queen had developed strong relationships with leading trainers and breeders, the news was received with particular sadness. Aidan O'Brien, who had trained multiple horses for the Queen at his Ballydoyle stable, emphasized how her involvement had elevated the profile of European racing worldwide. The annual visits by the Queen to inspect her horses in training had become events that attracted international media attention and promoted Irish racing excellence. The bloodstock industry, which facilitates the buying and selling of thoroughbreds worldwide, immediately began positioning for potential opportunities. At Tattersall's, Europe's largest bloodstock auctioneers, senior executives found themselves fielding calls from potential buyers around the world. The prospect of acquiring horses with royal provenance created excitement among collectors and investors who understood that such opportunities might never arise again. American interest proved particularly intense. Leading figures in American racing, from the Coolmore operation to major individual owners, began making discreet inquiries about the possibility of purchasing entire sections of the royal bloodstock. The symbolic value of owning horses previously raced in the Queen's colors appealed to American owners who had always admired the tradition and prestige of British racing. The financial implications began to crystallize as bloodstock experts attempted to value the royal racing assets. Conservative estimates suggested that the horses in training alone might be worth £15 million, while the breeding stock could command significantly more depending on market conditions and the timing of any sale. The prospect of such a substantial addition to the bloodstock market created both excitement and concern about potential impacts on prices. Public reaction proved complex and emotionally charged. Traditional racing fans expressed deep disappointment at the possibility of losing royal participation, viewing it as another step in the erosion of British traditions and values. Letter-writing campaigns to newspapers revealed the depth of feeling among older racing enthusiasts who had grown up regarding the Queen's racing success as a source of national pride. Younger racing fans showed more understanding of the King's position, acknowledging the financial pressures facing modern institutions and the need to prioritize resources. Social media discussions revealed a generational divide, with older participants expressing nostalgia for traditions that younger participants sometimes viewed as outdated or elitist. The broader cultural implications became apparent as commentators began analyzing what the potential sale represented about changing British society. Some viewed it as a necessary modernization of the monarchy, bringing royal spending in line with contemporary expectations of fiscal responsibility. Others saw it as abandonment of precisely the kind of cultural institutions that made the monarchy relevant and valuable to British society. Racing industry leaders began organizing responses designed to preserve some form of royal involvement in sport. The British Horse Racing Authority opened discussions about creating a foundation that might maintain some aspects of the Queen's breeding program while reducing costs to the royal household. Various compromise proposals emerged, from scaling back the operation significantly to transferring ownership to a charitable trust that would maintain royal connections while spreading costs across the industry. The timing proved particularly challenging as the international racing calendar moved toward the year-end breeding season. Decisions about which mares would be bred to which stallions needed to be made soon, requiring clarity about future ownership and objectives. The uncertainty created practical complications that extended beyond the immediate royal horses to affect breeding plans throughout the industry. Media coverage intensified as journalists sought to understand the personal dimension of the king's decision. Interviews with former royal staff revealed the depth of the Queen's knowledge and passion for racing. Her former racing manager described late-night phone calls about training decisions, her ability to recall the lineage of horses going back generations, and her genuine excitement when discussing promising young prospects. The emotional toll on those closest to the royal racing operation became increasingly apparent. John Warren, who had served as racing manager during some of the Queen's greatest triumphs, faced the possibility that his life's work might be dismantled. The staff at Sandringham Stud, many of whom had worked there for decades, confronted uncertainty about their future employment and the continuation of traditions they had helped maintain. International diplomatic implications began to emerge as foreign racing authorities and prominent overseas owners expressed concern about the broader message that royal withdrawal might send about British commitment to the sport. Racing had served as an important diplomatic tool, creating connections between the royal family and influential figures worldwide. The loss of these connections would extend beyond racing to potentially impact broader cultural and commercial relationships. The horses themselves continued their routines, unaware of the discussions determining their futures. Morning training sessions at Newmarket proceeded normally, with royal horses continuing to work alongside those owned by other prominent figures in racing. The sight of horses wearing royal exercise sheets served as daily reminders of the legacy that hung in the balance. As pressure for a final decision intensified, leaked reports suggested that the king was considering various compromise solutions that might preserve some elements of his mother's racing legacy, while addressing the financial and practical concerns that had prompted the review. These potential middle ground approaches offered hope to racing enthusiasts while acknowledging the legitimate concerns that had initiated the entire discussion. The stage was set for a resolution that would need to balance respect for the Queen's memory with the practical demands of modern royal leadership, satisfying competing interests while establishing precedents that would influence royal decision-making for years to come. The racing world waited anxiously for a decision that would determine not just the fate of 43 thoroughbred horses, but the future relationship between the British monarchy and one of the nation's most traditional sports. The December morning when King Charles made his final decision dawned clear and cold across the Sandringham estate. He had spent the previous evening walking alone through the stables where his mother's horses were housed, stopping at each stall to observe the animals that had brought her such joy throughout her long reign. The weight of the decision had grown heavier with each passing day, as letters from racing enthusiasts, industry professionals, and ordinary members of the public continued to arrive at Buckingham Palace. The king's final decision-making process had been characteristically thorough and deeply personal. He had consulted not only with his official advisors, but had reached out to family members who had shared the Queen's passion for racing. Princess, and herself an accomplished equestrian and someone who had often accompanied her mother to racing events, had provided crucial insight into the emotional significance of the racing operation beyond its financial implications. The compromise solution that eventually emerged reflected Charles's attempt to honor his mother's legacy while addressing the practical concerns that had initiated the review. Rather than disposing of the entire racing operation, the king decided to implement a carefully planned reduction that would maintain the essence of royal racing while significantly reducing costs and administrative burden. The plan, developed over weeks of detailed consultation, involved several key elements. Approximately half of the horses currently in training would be sold, with priority given to keeping the most promising young horses and proven broodmares whose breeding careers could continue to influence British bloodlines for years to come. The Sandringham stud would continue operating, but at a reduced scale, focusing on quality over quantity in a way that the Queen herself had always advocated. The selection process for which horses to retain proved emotionally challenging. John Warren worked closely with the king to identify horses that represented the best of the Queen's breeding philosophy, animals whose lineage and potential made them essential to preserving the genetic legacy she had spent decades developing. Horses with particular sentimental value, including some that had been personal favorites of the Queen, received special consideration in the retention decisions. The announcement of the decision was carefully orchestrated to minimize market disruption while providing clarity to the racing industry. The palace released a detailed statement explaining the king's reasoning, emphasizing his deep respect for his mother's passion while acknowledging the need to adapt royal operations to contemporary circumstances. The statement stressed that the reduced operation would maintain the same standards of excellence that had characterized royal racing for generations. The immediate market reaction was more muted than many had expected. The decision to sell roughly half the horses, rather than the entire operation, meant that supply would increase gradually rather than flooding the market with royal bloodstock. Tattersall's announced that they would handle the sale of the selected horses through a series of special auctions spread across several months, allowing serious buyers time to evaluate opportunities while maintaining market stability. International interest in the horses selected for sale proved intense. Sheikh Mohammed of Dubai, whose Godolphin operation had competed with royal horses for decades, expressed immediate interest in acquiring several of the young horses in training. American buyers, led by major breeding operations in Kentucky, began assembling consortiums to bid on the most valuable bloodstock. The prospect of owning horses with royal provenance created excitement among collectors worldwide. The decision's impact on employment proved less severe than many had feared. While some staff reductions were inevitable, the graduated approach allowed for natural attrition and retraining programs that helped existing employees transition to new roles within the reduced operation or find positions elsewhere in the racing industry. The king's personal involvement in ensuring fair treatment for affected employees reflected his understanding of the human dimension of the changes. The racing community's response revealed the depth of relief that some form of royal involvement would continue. Sir Michael Stout, who would continue training a smaller string of royal horses, expressed gratitude that the connection between the monarchy and racing would be maintained. The prospect of seeing royal colors continue to compete at major race meetings, even if less frequently, preserved the symbolic connection that many felt was essential to British racing's identity. The breeding implications of the decision became clearer as Warren outlined which bloodlines would be preserved and which would be dispersed. The retention of key broodmares ensured that the genetic legacy the Queen had developed would continue to influence British breeding for decades to come. The horses selected for sale included some that, while valuable, were less central to the long-term breeding philosophy that had guided the royal program. The first sales, scheduled for the following spring, would test the market's appetite for royal bloodstock. Early indications suggested that demand would be strong, with the combination of royal provenance and genuine quality creating appeal among both serious racing operations and collectors seeking horses with unique historical significance. The staggered sale approach would allow the market to absorb the additional supply while maintaining strong prices for quality animals. The symbolic dimension of the decision resonated beyond the racing community. The king's choice to maintain a reduced royal presence in racing, rather than withdrawing entirely, was interpreted by many as an example of his approach to modernizing the monarchy while preserving its essential traditions. The balance between change and continuity that the decision represented would influence how other royal activities might be evaluated and adapted in the future. The international implications proved significant as foreign racing authorities and prominent overseas owners welcomed the decision to maintain some level of royal involvement. The continuation of royal participation, even at a reduced level, preserved important diplomatic and cultural connections that extended beyond racing to broader international relationships. The royal colors would continue to be seen at major international race meetings, maintaining Britain's profile in the global racing community. The technical aspects of implementing the decision required careful coordination between multiple parties. Legal arrangements for the sales needed to be structured to maximize returns while ensuring appropriate treatment of the animals involved. Insurance, transportation, and veterinary considerations all required detailed planning to ensure smooth transitions for the horses being sold. The timing of the announcement, coming during the traditional quiet period between racing seasons, allowed the industry time to absorb the implications before the new racing year began. This thoughtful scheduling demonstrated the king's understanding of racing's rhythms and his desire to minimize disruption to ongoing operations. The careful communication of the decision helped ensure that speculation and rumors were replaced by clear information about what would actually happen. Media coverage of the decision generally praised the king's balanced approach, recognizing both his respect for his mother's legacy and his acknowledgement of contemporary realities. Editorial commentary highlighted the difficulty of the choice and the thoughtfulness of the compromise solution. The decision was widely viewed as an early indication of how Charles intended to approach the challenging balance between tradition and modernization that would characterize his reign. The racing world began adapting to the new reality with characteristic resilience. Trainers adjusted their expectations for royal horses in their care, bloodstock agents prepared for the upcoming sales opportunities, and racing fans looked forward to continuing to see royal colors in major competitions. The knowledge that royal racing would continue, even in modified form, provided reassurance that an important connection between monarchy and sport would be preserved. As the year drew to a close, the full implications of the king's decision were still unfolding. The careful balance he had struck between honoring his mother's passion and addressing practical concerns had provided a template for how difficult decisions about royal traditions might be approached in the future. The racing world had avoided the complete loss of royal participation while accepting the reality that change was necessary in a modern monarchy operating under increased scrutiny and financial pressure. The spring sale season of 2026 would be remembered as a watershed moment in international bloodstock history. The Tattersall sales ring had witnessed many significant dispersals over the decades, but nothing quite compared to the atmosphere surrounding the first auction of horses from the royal collection. International buyers had traveled from every major racing nation, creating a gathering that represented the global reach and respect that Queen Elizabeth II racing operation had achieved over 7 decades. The opening lot, a 3-year-old colt in training with Sir Michael Stout, carried estimate values that reflected both the animal's racing potential and the unique historical significance of royal ownership. As the bidding opened, the intensity in the sales ring was palpable. American buyers competed with Middle Eastern operations and European breeders, each recognizing that they were participating in the dispersal of one of racing's most storied collections. The final hammer prize for the opening lot exceeded all expectations, setting the tone for what would become the most successful bloodstock sale in European history. The combination of royal provenance and genuine quality created a market dynamic that surprised even experienced bloodstock professionals. The purple and gold silks that had carried these horses to victory had clearly added significant value beyond their racing ability alone. Sheikh Mohammed's Godolphin operation emerged as one of the most successful buyers, acquiring several of the younger horses in training along with proven broodmares whose bloodlines would enhance their international breeding program. The Sheikh's long relationship with the Queen, built through decades of competing at the highest level of international racing, made his participation particularly meaningful. His successful bids represented not just commercial transactions, but a continuation of the relationships and rivalries that had defined elite racing for generations. American interest proved equally strong, with Coolmore's representatives securing several key lots that would travel to their Kentucky breeding operation. The prospect of integrating royal bloodlines with their existing stallion roster excited American breeders who understood the genetic value that the Queen's careful breeding program had created. The horses would carry their royal heritage to a new continent while contributing to the global development of the thoroughbred breed. The emotional dimension of the sales became apparent in the reaction of those who had worked most closely with the horses being sold. Stable staff who had cared for these animals for years watched from the sales ring gallery as horses they had groomed and exercised were led through the ring to new ownership. The mixture of pride in the prices achieved and sadness at seeing the animals leave created a poignant atmosphere that reflected the deep personal connections involved. John Warren, who had overseen the royal racing operation during its most successful period, found the sales both gratifying and melancholy. The strong prices achieved validated the quality of the program he had helped develop with the Queen, but each successful bid represented the end of relationships and traditions that had defined his professional life. His decision to continue managing the reduced royal operation provided continuity, while acknowledging that the scale and scope would never be quite the same. The horses retained by the king began their new chapter under modified arrangements that reflected the streamlined approach to royal racing. The smaller string of horses in training meant more concentrated attention on each individual animal, potentially improving their chances of success while reducing overall costs. The retained broodmares represented the genetic heart of the Queen's breeding program, ensuring that her influence on bloodlines would continue for generations to come. The first major race victory by a horse, still carrying the royal colors, came sooner than anyone had expected. In late spring, a 3-year-old filly retained in the downsized operation won a Group 2 race at York, providing an emotional moment that demonstrated the continued potential of royal racing. The king's obvious pleasure at the victory, captured by television cameras as he watched from the owner's box, showed that while his passion might not match his mother's intensity, he could still appreciate the excitement of racing success. The success of the sales program validated the king's decision to pursue a gradual reduction rather than complete withdrawal from racing. The strong market reception demonstrated that royal involvement in racing retained significant value, both commercially and symbolically. The careful selection of which horses to retain and which to sell had preserved the essential genetic foundation of the program, while achieving financial objectives that satisfied royal household budgets. The broader implications for British racing became clearer as the year progressed. Rather than diminishing the sport's prestige, the royal sales had actually increased international attention and investment in British bloodstock. The global media coverage of the auctions had promoted British racing worldwide, attracting new owners and investors who might not otherwise have considered participating in European racing. The employment implications proved more positive than initially feared. Many of the staff members affected by the reduction found positions with other racing operations, often with owners who had purchased royal horses and wanted to maintain continuity in their care. The specialized skills and high standards associated with working in the royal operation made these employees highly sought after throughout the racing industry. The diplomatic benefits of maintaining some royal involvement in racing became apparent through continued international relationships built around shared interest in the sport. The king's appearances at major race meetings, while less frequent than his mother's, still provided opportunities for informal diplomatic contact with foreign dignitaries who shared interests in racing and breeding. These connections proved valuable in ways that extended far beyond sport into broader international relationships. The cultural impact of the king's decision resonated throughout British society as an example of thoughtful modernization that preserved essential traditions while adapting to contemporary realities. The careful balance struck between respect for the past and Acknowledgement of present needs provided a template for how other traditional institutions might approach similar challenges. The decision was widely studied by organizations facing pressures to maintain relevance while controlling costs. The horses sold through the spring auctions began making their mark in their new homes around the world. Early reports from trainers in America, Ireland, and the Middle East suggested that the animals were adapting well to their new environments while maintaining the quality standards that had characterized their breeding and early training. The global dispersal of royal bloodlines would influence racing and breeding worldwide for decades to come. The reduced royal operation settled into its new routine with surprising success. The smaller scale allowed for more intensive management of each horse, potentially improving outcomes while reducing overall complexity. The continued presence of experienced staff, like John Warren, provided continuity with the Queen's methods while allowing adaptation to change circumstances. The essential character of royal racing was preserved even as its scope was necessarily reduced. As the first anniversary of the Queen's death approached, the King's handling of the racing legacy was increasingly viewed as a successful example of honoring the past while adapting to present needs. The continued success of retained horses validated the selection decisions, while the strong performance of sold horses in their new homes demonstrated the quality of the overall program. The balance achieved between tradition and change reflected the thoughtful approach that would characterize the new reign. The racing world had adapted to the new reality with characteristic resilience and innovation. The injection of royal bloodstock into the international market had created new breeding opportunities and competitions that enriched the global sport. The continued presence of royal colors at major race meetings, even if less frequent than before, maintained an important symbolic connection between monarchy and one of Britain's most traditional sports. The story of King Charles and the Queen's racehorses ultimately became a testament to the possibility of preserving essential traditions while acknowledging contemporary constraints. The careful balance achieved between sentiment and practicality provided a model for thoughtful leadership in changing times. The racing world had feared the complete loss of royal participation, but instead found a way to maintain the connection while adapting to new circumstances. The legacy of Queen Elizabeth II's passion for racing lived on in the bloodlines dispersed around the world and the reduced but continuing royal involvement in the sport. Her influence on thoroughbred breeding would extend far beyond her lifetime through the horses she had bred and the standards she had maintained. The King's decision ensured that this legacy would continue while acknowledging the practical realities that any modern institution must face. The purple and gold silks continued to appear at race meetings across Britain and beyond, carried by horses whose heritage traced back through generations of royal breeding excellence. Each appearance served as a reminder of a remarkable woman's lifelong passion and the thoughtful way her son had chosen to honor that legacy while facing the challenges of leadership in a new era. The racing world had learned that change and continuity could coexist, preserving what mattered most while adapting to contemporary needs.